Hey there, and thanks for joining us for The Weekly Grind, a podcast where we work out the topics that shape and influence the culture, community, and church of today from a biblical perspective. I'm Ben, here with my pastor and good friend Chip. He is the lead pastor, and I'm the worship pastor at the Napoleon Church of the Nazarene. Today on the podcast, we are joined by the newest member of the team here at NapNaz, Justin Braun. We spent some time today in the podcast talking about God's call on his life and how he has navigated finding God's will through the past few years from being a successful engineering student major to pastoral ministry. This is The Weekly Grind. All right, well, I think we have a fun podcast for you today. It's an exciting one. I'm excited about it. And it kind of adds to episode 10, where we talked about determining the will of God, and we shared some of our own experiences, Chip, of just how God brought us through and how we navigated that, and the 90-10 rule, right?
Absolutely.
Where, really 90% of the will he has for my life is 90% of what he has for your life. And so often we get fixated on that 10%. And so,
I think what we get to talk about today is a little bit of that 10%.
Yeah.
But yet somebody who was immersed in the 90%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the 10% is playing out.
It just kind of plays out.
That's right.
Yeah. So today with us we have Justin Braun, and it's a privilege
It's good to be here.
to have you on today, and it's a privilege
Is that Jordan or Justin?
I think this one's Justin.
We got jokes.
That's what his name tag said. And this is an exciting time for our church as well. Yeah. And so we have an opportunity to bring one of our own back for a 10 or 12 month internship, whatever that looks like. He's going to be in and out of all of the different ministries and things that go on here. And but I want to hear your story today, and a little bit about where God's taking you. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we had you on today.
Sounds great.
And we're excited about it.
I think that what's cool about today is we get a little bit of this is what it looks like in real life. We can talk about Scripture, we can talk about kingdom,
abstract ideas.
Absolutely. Abstract's a great word.
Yeah.
But how does that play out? What is there a name and a face with it? Mm-hmm. And I think we wanted to continue the conversation of God's will. And you are a good example to us to how that kind of plays out. And I think all of us make plans, right? We have hopes, desires, wishes. And a lot of times we wrestle with, are my goals, are my plans, even are my desires a lot of times, do they align with God's will?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, at least in my own life personally, I had a lot of fear. And some of it was my background and an overplay on certain characteristics of God.
Yeah.
But I thought, I really like that, but probably God doesn't want that for my life. And I think, honestly, as a pastor now for 15 years, I have pastored a lot of people that live in that area. This is what I want to do with my life, but I have this fear that it's not what God wants me to do with my life. And that somehow God actually wants me to give up certain goals and desires for something else that he wants me to do.
Right.
Well, and it's kind of, the enemy of great is just good.
Absolutely.
And just kind of on par. And so we can settle for a life where God can use us. But if he's speaking into our lives and we know that God wants to use us for great things, which he does for each of us, it's going to take a little bit of a boldness, of maybe foolishness in the eyes of the world.
Yeah.
So, and I want to hear a little bit about your story and share it. I know big chunks of it.
Yeah.
But you're raised in Napoleon, right here in this church.
Yeah.
Have a lot of relationships here, and then you went off to to University of Toledo. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, so University of Toledo, engineering, in my eyes, I was doing the right thing. You know, you're good in math and science in high school. And
makes sense on paper then.
Exactly. The right track is you're good in math and science, you're going to engineering school. That's the way you raise a family, right? Engineering is the secure route to raising a family, and that's nothing wrong with that. I had dreams of going to med school through engineering. So not only did I want to be an engineer, but I had these lofty goals of wanting to go to med school because I'm like, this is the smart route. This is how you make an impact in the world. You make a change, make a difference, but you're also getting some of the prestige and the honor along with
You're
that.
experiencing the American dream.
Right, exactly. That's what going into college was like. But it was in college though that God kind of made my faith my own. He came in. It was when I left Napoleon for the first time, in which my faith was no longer dependent, not even on my parents, but on this church in particular. I had this amazing, great church family that I could rely upon for so long. And then leaving here, and Toledo is 40 minutes away? It's not that far. Yeah. But for the very first time, I was left with the decision, like, am I going to continue pursuing this faith, or will I just do my own thing? And so that created, honestly, a lot of pain at the beginning. There was a huge identity crisis.
Growth usually does.
Oh, man, pruning like none other.
Yeah.
And you're in an environment that, quite honestly, is not going to make your decision any easier.
Yeah, this wasn't a Bible school. This wasn't.
Right. You're challenged.
Yeah, and that's really kind of the start of it all, and where that was going. So
cool. So engineering. You is that 4-year degree?
For Toledo, it's a 5-year degree.
5-year degree,
yeah.
and you spent some time actually in Warsaw on the job training and all that kind of stuff. And, so was that something that you were satisfied with?
It's a weird. Satisfied's a weird thing.
Yeah.
The experiences that I got working within the engineering realm in Warsaw. I mean, it's the hub of orthopedics, and I mean, it was you get this idea of it's a pretty prestigious thing. I mean, you're working on this new cutting edge technology on knee development, knee replacements. And I mean, it was amazing. Working on cadavers, working with the surgeons.
And truly making a difference, like you said. You have an opportunity to really make a difference.
Whoa. Did you say cadavers?
Oh, yeah. So many stories of working in there with surgeons and the engineers, developing processes and tools and instruments that you're going in there.
That's not my dream. Right.
Chips in the right place.
But it felt great. You know, you're in Warsaw and you're working with other engineers, and I don't know if the work necessarily left me satisfied, but definitely the image it gave me, the image that I thought I had, left me satisfied. The people I worked with left me satisfied.
So what's your degree in? It's through the University of Toledo.
Bioengineering.
Bioengineering.
So obviously, sitting right here in a church podcast setting as an intern on a church staff, something changed.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Most
Can you
definitely.
just talk about that? Because I think at the end, the takeaway, there is a inherent trust in the goodness of God that it ends up, your life is testifying to that. My life, Ben's life, where when God leads, we come to a point where we recognize He is so good.
Yeah.
He knows us better than anybody, and He actually knows what makes us sing. What makes us live, where we're wired, and so obviously something changed.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting here, not in Warsaw, Indiana anymore,
right.
or somewhere else, working on cadavers.
Right.
Although maybe some days it feels like you're talk about that.
Dead bodies around here. No.
Hope not.
No, I think it was a process that was slow. It was a process that I didn't even realize it was a very subtle process that I didn't even realize was happening until I looked back on my years. I'm like, wow, this is what happened. You know, in hindsight is 2020. And like I said, the beginning of college is where God determined to show me, like, you're gonna make your faith your own. And so when it came to interning in Warsaw, Indiana, even that was I felt great. I was working as an engineering intern with great people doing amazing things. But then in Warsaw, even I had this innate desire, like, hey, we got to do something here. And so that's just started with leading a Bible study in Warsaw, really thinking nothing of it. I mean, that's how we were all raised. Like, we need to be in the Bible. We need to be having a Bible study. But even that, though, I began to feel like I loved doing that. I got some of the engineering interns around me. We're like, let's do this. Let's start this Bible study. And I co-led a Bible study with a friend, and it brought a lot of joy in my life. Sitting there, walking through, we did 1 Samuel, just a random, and it was great. It was fantastic. But even that, I wasn't even thinking ministry at that point in time. So when we would rotate semesters between co-oping or interning and coming back to school. So I'd come back to school, and I was enveloped with the church community in Toledo. The pastor of the church that I was going to, he pushed us out of our comfort zone, and he challenged us, hey, get up with me at 6 o'clock on a Thursday morning, and we're going to do an in-depth study of Mark. And that brought a lot of joy in my life. And all of a sudden I began to realize, wait a minute, I love this so much more than studying engineering. Maybe that's a gimme, but I began to realize
I do too.
Yeah, and it was so amazing to really begin thinking about, like, I love the truths that I'm learning. I love getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't if I'm being honest, I didn't make that every single week, but doing stuff of that nature brought true joy in my life. Again, still not thinking about the ministry aspect until one day I was challenged. It was a college-led Sunday at the church we were going to, and I got voluntold, like, hey, we want you to kind of give a 6-minute sermon, if you will.
Had you done that before?
Never.
That type of thing? Okay.
In public speaking, I mean, you can ask my high school speech teacher.
So up until then, it's leading small groups, being a part of small groups.
That's it, yeah.
But nothing.
Nothing,
like that.
yeah. And that the thought terrified me at that point in time. I mean, so incredibly nervous. And I was actually resentful that someone told me to do this, because I didn't volunteer for this. There was no part of me that had a desire to do this.
Chip tells me to do that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's good though.
Yeah, and it ended up being so good. And it was at that point in time, for the very first time, after I kind of gave that 6-minute spiel, where the pastor's wife, actually, of that church, she came up to me and my family, and she's like, you have something there. You should think about at least thinking about it.
Cool.
And that began a train of thought that eventually led me to being right here. Moving on, I would go on to work as an engineer for a year. I lived that life. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't running away from something, but running towards something. Yeah. And after a year of that, eventually, here I am.
I just seemed. I'm sorry. Seemed to me maybe like in that year, was there a growing awareness?
Yeah.
I found even in my own life that it can be easy when God starts to speak to you about something. Mm-hmm. We don't know what to do with it. And sometimes, quite honestly, I know personally, not maybe huge things, but just the day-to-day or the life things, it can be easy to quench the spirit at first just because we're uncomfortable, we're unsure, we don't want to be. But I found that when God has led me to something, He just patiently continues to keep it in front of me.
That's
I
exactly
can't
right.
get away from
That's
it.
exactly right.
And then there's a growing awareness in my life. This is what I got to do.
Yeah.
This is who I got to be. Was it like that, or
hands down? I mean, like I said, it was a very slow process.
Yeah.
But even in that year that I worked full time as an engineer back in Warsaw, Indiana, even then, I had this innate desire, like I want to get involved in ministry. I want to get plugged into a church. And so I began leading a Bible study there, and I was seeking out mentorship. So at this point in time, the advice from my father, hey, continue to discern. Don't let this be a gut reaction. Don't let this be something you're running away from. But let this be something that you're truly discerning and getting advice from others. So I get to Warsaw, and I felt the conviction, like I need to seek out a mentor here. So I sought out the pastor of the church that I was going to, and he was I was receiving affirmation from friends and mentors in my life saying, hey, no, I think this is actually something that not only could you be good at, but this might be a calling on your life. And I realized for myself that I couldn't make that decision on my own. It was the leading of others, the discernment of others, God-fearing wisdom of others that help me
And
lead.
what a testament of having godly parents that, I mean, you have a child that just excelled through a 5-year degree at the University of Toledo, and now he feels the call of God to maybe do something to change course. And
to a less secure route, if you will.
and to a less, I mean, you mentioned American dream of just that, all intents and purposes, the security part of it and everything. To have that and to have, that's a cool prophetic word that the pastor's wife spoke kind of into you as well. That
I thought she was crazy at the time.
Yeah, you have that. I kind of have that in my own life and in the call out of my ministry. It's almost like somebody you're searching, you're kind of working through these feelings and where God's leading you, and then somebody just puts a magnifying glass right over it, and just draws your attention to it, and then it's like, okay, and there's a new awareness.
And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened.
And this might be a little bit of a detour. We'll continue, you're finishing up that year, but something we've talked about from our own experiences. And if this is a podcast to try to, bring attention to and understand the kingdom community and kingdom life, we are illustrations of the power of community that exists in the kingdom.
That's exactly right.
Discerning, godly people can speak into our life and actually see things we don't see.
Yeah.
Or breathe confidence when we're kind of faltering. And I know I wouldn't be where I'm at without a kingdom community. And I think this is something we keep coming back to. What God has put together in the kingdom, boy, it is life-giving, and it also helps each one of us tap into experience and find who we're meant to be.
Yeah.
And it's fulfilling. And I just wanted to take a moment and remind, all our listeners, remind ourselves that what we're a part of is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And maybe I'm starting to move to that point, in my late 30s. Oh, I'm sorry, 40.
Yeah, you're well into 40, yeah.
I'm well into 40. Come on, man.
Well into your 40th year.
Yeah,
of
there
life.
you go.
That's what I meant.
But maybe I'm on moving toward the other side where God needs to use me to have discernment and speak confidence into lives that are coming up.
Yeah.
But it is a beautiful thing, the kingdom community. And I challenge anybody, if you will immerse yourself in the kingdom through groups, through relationships, through serving together, what will happen in your life will bring all sorts of value.
Right.
And you'll have trusted people around you that will help you experience, fulfillment.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Especially
right.
looking back, like you said, over the years of, just looking back and seeing how God was working in that time when maybe we didn't have that clear vision or couldn't see how he was working in our lives.
Yeah. And honestly, through those 5 years at Toledo, and even into the year of working there were a lot of failures within that, a lot of pain that required me to process, like, God, what are you doing in this moment? And it was because of the community around me that was speaking into my life, like, hey, look at what God has done for you. Look what God has provided for you up until this point in time. You might not be going down the track that you had envisioned for yourself at the beginning of the 5 years, but look what's going on right here, right now. And so it wasn't that I just changed courses. It was just that God had me on this course all along, and He was directing me the entire time. Like, this is what I have for you. You were looking to the left while you were driving down this road, but if you had just turned to the right, you would have seen exactly where I was taking you.
And it's not if somebody speaks in you, but who is speaking into you.
Exactly.
Because I fully believe, God using those relationships to affirm and reaffirm. And if you're not surrounding yourself with godly influence, it makes it a lot harder to discern.
Right. I mean, if we are the body of Christ, yet we're trying to work alone. I mean, it would be as if I'm separating the foot from the body and trying to move the foot without the body. I need the body to help move me, and the body needs me to help move the body.
Absolutely.
We're all in this together.
So talk about ending up that year at Warsaw and kind of the tangible, concrete steps you begin to take in embracing God's call for your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Going into it was a crazy week at the end of my engineering time in Toledo, where I received my last rejection from med school. I received my acceptance to Dallas Seminary, and I received a job offer from an engineering company. Wow. And so all of a sudden, I'm looking at what's in front of me. I see my vision for becoming a doctor, and it is completely shut down. I see engineering in front of me, and I'm like, man, do I really want to do this? And I see seminary in front of me. I'm like, that's intriguing to me. And unfortunately, at this point in time, I have not processed this with anybody. I haven't talked to my parents. I haven't talked to my brother or any friends about this. Like I said, I was trying to dislocate the foot from the rest of the body. So this is when I begin the conversations, and this is where my dad speaks wisdom into me, saying, hey, how about you take this year? You've been provided this job offer. Why don't you take this year to discern what your next steps are. Make sure that this is truly what you're, not that he was dissuading me from going to seminary or pursuing ministry, but he's like, make sure this is exactly what God is calling you to. Don't make just this a gut reaction. So I moved to Warsaw, begin working, and it was at that point in time where I start looking into what does a life of ministry look like? What does going to seminary look like? What is this all about? This is when I look up my pastor. I'm like, hey, give me advice. What is going on here? What am I supposed to do? Should I go to this seminary? So he began speaking into my life, and then at the same time, he was giving me opportunities. If he was giving me opportunities to kind of prove the calling on my life, to discern that, he's like, why don't you go ahead and lead this college group? Lead your peers through the Bible.
Do you really have the gifts and graces?
And
that helps you to see too.
That's exactly right. And fortunately, I had a group of people around me within the Warsaw area who was willing to speak truth into my life. Hey, dude, you're not doing such a hot job leading this Bible study, or hey, I really appreciated what you had to say here. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, the pastor gave me an opportunity. He's like, you think you want to be a preacher? Preach in front of a congregation. Preach in front of give a real sermon in front of several hundred people. Do this, and if you think you can do that well, we'll see about that. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of pushed me out of the nest and like, let's see if you can fly. Mm-hmm. Let's see what you're going to do here. And he gave me that opportunity. Oh. So, and through that, I mean, I started looking at different seminaries, and it was visiting Dallas. I'm like, man, this is true. This is real. My desire to continue pursuing what God has for me. And that's honestly where it became like, this is happening. This is what I'm going to start pursuing.
One of the things that I haven't heard you say, which I'm happy about, is like, it's never too late, right? Mm. So like, man, I've already made the decision for my life. This is where I'm headed. And, to go back now, I've put all this time and energy, and it's like, God's calling you. Like, it's not late. If you're 50 years old and you feel the call of God on your life, answer it.
Right.
Like, it's not too late to ever do any of that stuff.
And the importance of talking about that. If you start getting that inkling, I mean, granted, I'm only 26. I don't have that life experience, but what I know is that if I didn't start talking about it with others around me, I never would have received the affirmation like, hey, this is actually what God's calling you to.
We just have so many external pressures, especially in high school, by the time we graduate high school, to have it figured out and to have the direction of our lives figured out. And that's not right.
No. And we're finding that out too. Like,
and we're finding that out
what are the
hard
percentages of college students now that are changing their major? Like,
I switched.
I'm sure there's a lot of
parents.
Yeah.
4 times I switched because I just felt like I had to decide something and go with it.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of parents that are like, please.
Yeah.
You keep switching their major. It's just longer schooling.
Well, you're going to see a big switch in that once all those students grow up and have kids, and they really want them to decide and discern before you jump into stuff.
Yeah.
But talking about not being ever too late. I mean, look at Moses, 80 years old.
Perfect example.
80 years old.
Yeah.
Who, brash young cocky, take it into his own hands at 40.
Yeah.
At 80,
His greatest work was ahead of him.
right, and his confidence had been shaken to the point where he's like, surely I'm not the guy, God, I'm 80.
Yeah, wrong guy.
And yet, through the whole Exodus chapter 1, 2, and 3, and it became apparent to him, and it wasn't too late for him.
Yeah.
In fact, the best years were ahead of him.
Yeah.
I think for me, if we're talking to the vast majority of people who would look at your story and say, I know God's not going to call me into ministry. But what's the takeaway that we can always be learning from one another about being willing to trust in the goodness of God, that when he calls us to do something, to be a part of a ministry, for me, it's like, I believe God is calling people in our congregation to start a ministry, to give their life's work. I just had meetings with a couple people that God's been speaking to them for 3 years about something in this church, and they're open in their heart, and I believe it's going to be a life's work.
Yeah,
I believe that this particular lady, what she's walking into, I think 10 or 15 years, or the next 10 or 15 years, the fruit that's going to come from her following God, and she's going to look back sitting in a rocking chair on her front porch at 75 and say, I'm so thankful God called me to do that, because look at how much he did. And so just talk about, what does it look like to go upstream or against the stream to do something that I'm sure is not understood by definitely our world?
sure.
Like, how do you walk away from a degree already to go into something uncertain?
Yeah.
What does that look like? And is it courage? Do you just talk about that? How would you communicate to somebody about embracing what God's calling them to?
Well, I think, and going back to the episode 10 of what you guys discussed, this 90-10 rule of we're all called to the same 90%. And I think to a certain extent, it begins with that. Like I said, like when I entered college and God hit me with a 2x4 and like, it's time, either you get real or you don't get real.
Live the word out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, when I begin living in the 90%, if you will, and granted, it wasn't probably the full 90% or whatever you would have.
Striving for the 90.
Exactly. When I started striving after this 90, when I began really living in the Word, being transformed by the Word, all of a sudden Romans 12, 1 and 2 come into play, and like all of a sudden not being conformed to the world and being transformed by the renewing of your mind, it's kind of like getting out of that rut. And it's the first part is getting out of the rut, and then you're riding above the rut. And all of a sudden you see, like, wait a minute, this is amazing. This is what God has for me. And even though, the majority of the world might not understand, did it take courage? Sure. But to a certain extent, it was really no sacrifice of mine to leave the engineering world. Yeah, did I have a great salary? Did I have great health benefits? Yeah, it was great. But with where I am now, 2 years, 3 years after the fact, there is not an ounce of where I feel like, man, I made this huge sacrifice to come do a calling of God, because I truly believe that within those 5 years, 6 years, God got me out of the confirmation of the world, of that pattern of the world, and he allowed my mind to be renewed by his Spirit. So when it came to seeing his perfect and his good will, it was the easiest thing. And today I'm sitting here and I'm getting goosebumps because I am so excited with where God has me, because I began the journey of striving after that 90%. I wasn't worried about, I was, but God allowed me to be renewed in the sense of, forget about this 10% for a while. Let's get you on the basics. Let's get you surrounded with a community of godly people. Let's get you surrounded by a church people. Yeah. And then from that, whatever I have for you will just come naturally. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't like I was stuck. And yeah, granted, there might be these tough decisions of, do I go here for a job? Do I go here for a job? But in reality, it all came down to, how am I going to glorify God? And yeah, could I glorify God in an engineering job? Most definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in my desire and pursuit of wanting to glorify God, and as faulty as that may be, he brought me to where I'm at now. And is it a sacrifice? On paper, yes. But man, it is the easiest thing to be here right now.
You don't live thinking sacrifice.
Right. Not
Because when
yeah.
you embrace, I guess that's my word for today, I don't know. When you see the goodness of God and
exactly
how
right.
he's designed you and put you together, and when he leads your life, you realize I don't want to be anywhere else. I am the happiest, most fulfilled I will ever be. And so you don't even think about, well, this is where I could be right now.
Right.
Did you live with that every day, or do you not even?
I mean, there's a certain extent to where you look at those around you. I mean, I have an identical twin brother, and I see the life that he is living. And yeah, at points in time, I'm like, man, I could have a house like that. I could have a pool in my backyard. But at the same time, as great as that is for him, and as great as he's doing with his family, living in my parents' basement is just fine with me for the moment. But
I guarantee you're not going to stay there long.
No, and that's not even the point. That's not. I mean, the fulfillment and the joy that I'm receiving now through pursuing what God has for me, in the same way that my twin is pursuing what God has for him. We're both receiving
fulfillment.
Exactly.
Because it's the priesthood of all believers, and it's God has a will for each of us, and it's to live within the within that. That's our hope. That's our goal. I mean, my wife's a teacher. She fully believes that she is, and I affirm that she is doing kingdom work in the schools, and she's leveraging that and using that. No doubt, Jordan, the way that he lives his life in the business world and finance, like,
oh man, the testimonies he could give you from the conversations that he's had.
Absolutely. So it's not that, hey, trying to call everyone out of whatever they're doing into ministry.
No,
that's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
But it's determining what is it that God has for your life.
That's exactly right.
And it's only by being in the Word, right? It's being in community,
hands down,
in the body of Christ, and it's allowing people to speak into you. It's wise counsel, it's godly counsel.
Yeah,
it's people affirming things in you, maybe that you've been discovering. That's where it's at.
That's yeah. And I
think landing on this core identity, this core principle, that when God begins to prompt me, move me, show me, that it's going to be the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And I think the battleground is do we really trust in the goodness of God?
Yeah.
Because the world around us is telling us, and I look at your life, and there was a process where you have just come to a place where you absolutely believe that what God's calling you into is exactly who you want to be, who he made you to be, and that's fulfillment and happiness.
That's exactly right. I mean, I often think of, going back to the Exodus story, there's a time in my life to where I see that I have just, in a certain extent, came out of Egypt, and I'm seeing, like, wow, what God is doing in my life. This is so cool. And to a certain extent, that was being in college. But there came a point in time to where I had to face the Red Sea in front of me, and there was no the calling of my life coming into ministry, that came completely out of left field. In the same way that the Israelites are looking at the Red Sea and they're like, how are we, like, what's, and all of a sudden God comes out of left field and blows the waters open. And they had to trust that he was going to keep those waters apart the entire time as they walked. To a certain extent, I look back now and I'm like, wow, a lot of those parts were terrifying. Seeing the towers of water on either side of me, like, whether it's failure over here, the chance of failing, the chance of, like, maybe this isn't what God has for me.
Sure.
The chances of those coming down on me. But now I'm looking back and I'm like, wow. And now I've crossed the Red Sea, and I look back and that's amazing. That's amazing what God, it wasn't me, but it was definitely the community of believers that God worked through and getting me to where I am now.
Yeah.
It's a good word.
I think so. I hope you guys have gained something from this today.
Anything else you want to say? Hi to your mom, anybody?
Hi,
You know?
Mom.
Yeah.
Dad, I love you
She'll watch
too.
this one,
We're
I
happy to
guarantee.
have you, man. We're
Yeah.
happy to have you for
It's
the
good to be
next
here.
handful of months
Yeah.
here, and look forward to all that God's going to do in you and through you.
Yeah. Takeaway is when God leads, He is good,
Mm.
and what He has for you is the best.